when the Sarah Mashkim, the swine steward, he realizes that Paro has no one to interpret his dreams. All the interpretations that were offered fell on deaf ears. He rejected every one of them. And as we explained, because what they had said to him, as Rashi cited the Midrash, he's going to have 7 daughters, and then the 7 daughters are going to die. Whenever a king dreams, the dream has some relevance to his position as the monarch. It's not on a personal level. Therefore, having daughters and living and then dying definitely is not the message that's being communicated. It's something which has to do with his kingdom or beyond his kingdom. So he says, when he realizes that there's no one to interpret his dreams, so now there's a question like this: why did the wine steward not accommodate Yosef with his request? Remember me mentioning, because he was a bad person. He couldn't care less whether Yosef rots in the dungeon, doesn't rot in the dungeon. It's irrelevant to him. That's just the quality of the person we're speaking about. But now he realizes, if word should get out that there is someone who has the ability to interpret dreams, and he didn't divulge this to the king, he will have his head. He will be punished. Therefore, he has no choice, because again, he's worried about one person himself. He's not worried about Yosef. He's not even worried about Paro. And not only that, and if he divulges it and factually the king is satisfied with the interpretation, it's a feather in his cap. He's scoring points with the king. But even when he depicts Yosef, it's the most denigrating, pejorative way. As we mentioned, he's referred to as Nar, Ivri, Eved, L'Sar Tabochim, Pasuk Yud Beis. He's an unstable person. Nar means a fool. He's a person who doesn't speak our language, and he's a slave. He was a slave, and Rashi himself cites Chazal, that it was written in the protocols of Egypt that a person who's a slave cannot rise to power, cannot be appointed to a position of power within the Egyptian government. So therefore, even if Yosef succeeds with his interpretation, nevertheless, he's going to hold him at bay, that he will not rise. And we mentioned yesterday, from the Gemara in Sota, it's indicated that the night before he left prison, Gabriel was sent to teach him 70 languages. So when Yosef, as we'll see in a moment, was rushed from the dungeon to stand in the presence of Paro, Yosef already was fluent in 71 languages. There's a Balaturim in last week's parsha, which indicates that when he was in the house of Potiphar, when he assumed the role to oversee all the personal affairs of financial affairs of Potiphar, who was a minister, Gabriel already had taught him the 70 languages, meaning he already was fluent in 71 languages. So we explained that the Balaturim, the source seems to be not the Gemara. The Gemara, it's indicated it's the night before he was released from prison, that Yosef's function in terms of his ability, in terms of his value for Klal Yisrael, was always to control and dominate the physical world. And the first indication of that was when he was sold as a slave to Potiphar, and within a short period of time, he's running all his financial affairs and every other affair that's relevant to his life, except for his wife. Going with the Maral of Prague, which he says is in multiple locations, places, the number 7 always indicates, always signifies Teva, nature. The natural order is 7. Creation is 7. And therefore, 70 connotes the physical world. The Jewish people are the 71st nation. We transcend physicality. We dictate the world is dependent on our behavior, how God relates to this existence. Was 71. 71 languages indicates that Yosef dominates the physical world. 71. So when he rose to the position in the Sarat HaBochim, in the minister of whatever it means, either chief executioner or purveyor of meat, to oversee all his affairs, that was the moment he dictated and controlled all the material. So at that moment, right before he achieved that, Gabriel was sent to teach him 71 languages, because that already was an expression of that ability to control the physical. According to the Gemara, Beis Potiphar wasn't sufficient. He's an individual. And again, it manifested itself when he was in prison. He became the chief warden. Even in prison, he rose to be the unofficial warden. As it says again, the same language. The warden knew nothing that was going on in the prison. Everything was determined by Yosef. But the ultimate is this moment here, when he becomes the viceroy of Egypt, where Egypt is the height of civilization, and especially when it comes to the plenty and the famine, where the world, whether it perishes or continues, that's all determined by Yosef. Yosef is the sustainer of the world. Yosef wa mashbir. He oversees the selling of the food, the gathering of food. Whether the world perishes in famine or continues due to the plenty initially, and dealing with it responsibly. Therefore, the night before he was taken from the dungeon to interpret the dreams of Paro, he already was taught at that moment. That's when he was taught the 70 languages. So therefore, he was fluent in 71. We've mentioned that when Paro realized, we'll see in a moment, that Yosef knew 71 languages and he only knew 70, he made him take an oath that he will never reveal this. Because if it would be known that Paro knows 70 and Yosef knows 71, he would be dethroned. He'd be removed from his position as king. So we asked why. And it says in the Midrash that as much as Paro tried to become fluent in the Hebrew language, he wasn't able to do it. Yosef was fully fluent in 71. He forced him to take an oath. He will never divulge it. Now, we've mentioned in the past, Alan would remember this very well, Rabbeinu Bachya, the title of the Egyptian king, the position was Paro. Pharaoh. What's Paro? The letters Ayin Pei Reish, Ofer, is those letters are in the name Paro to indicate, the Rabbeinu Bachya writes, that the whole belief and the understanding of existence, that everything is Ofer. Ofer means earth. Dust. Everything is earthy. There's nothing beyond the physical realm. Whatever deities exist, the value of those deities are only to allow the physicality of the world to exist. That's Ofer. Everything's physical. That means everything is limited to the 7. There's nothing beyond the 7. And that's the belief of the Egyptians, and all aspects of their lives revolved around this. Was the central essence and the core of the Egyptian civilization. That was the foundation. Yosef now comes. So Paro was the totality of that, of the Ofer, 70. What happens if now you have one person knows 71 languages? One person you have contained 71. What is the representation of 71? 71 means there's something that transcends the 70. There's something that dominates the 70. All the 70, what does that mean? That means the basis for the Egyptian civilization, the beliefs, the philosophies, the perspectives, is all false. So if Yosef would reveal and divulge that he knows 71 languages, immediately the Egyptian civilization would collapse. They would realize they're living a lie. Therefore, that's why Paro, it was crucial and essential that nobody should know that Yosef knows 71. And he feared this. And because he knew 71, we'll see in a moment, That's why he understood Yosef had the ability to actually to manage the plenty and the famine the way it should be managed, to guarantee the survival of the offer. Because he understood Yosef was in connection with something which transcended the physical world. Because we'll see later when he goes and after he offers the interpretation, he says, have you ever seen, he said to his wise men, to all his courtiers, his advisors, have you ever seen anyone, Asher Ruach Elokimbo, he has the spirit of God within him. Meaning we said he actually is connected to something of spiritual, which goes beyond the human genius. This is divine genius. Okay, we'll see this in a moment. So the Sarah Mashkim tried to block every passageway for Yosef to rise to power. And even after he rose to power, and Paro had a problem, because as he said, he was Eved. Potiphar had purchased him as a slave. He was a slave. And the protocols of Egypt, slave cannot be in a ruling position. Until Yosef's brothers came to Egypt, and it was revealed that he was from this royal family, Paro had a problem. Because as much as he was effective and capable, people kept saying, it doesn't meet the protocols. We have a problem with this. He's a slave. He's a disgrace to us. He says, no, that's what they say. He really is not. So Paro, being the king, he was just pushing him off. He really didn't know factually. Only when Yosef's brothers, as it says, when it was known that his brothers had come, Paro, it found favor in the eyes of Paro and his subjects that Yosef now is known that he's royalty. Because now all the issues he puts at rest, nobody's going to claim now he's not qualified to be in a position of rulership. Yud Gimel. And as he interpreted, that's exactly how it was. I was restored, reinstated to my position, and he was hanged. What happens when Paro hears this? Vayishlach Paro vayikras Yosef. He sends immediately to call Yosef. Vayiritzu min abor. He's rushed. He's not brought from the pit. Vayiritzu min abor. Vayigalach vayichalif shemosov. He was groomed. He had a change of clothing. Vayavod Paro. And he comes to Paro. So over here, the Sifarno explains. What is the Torah telling us? Vayichalif shemosov. So he cites the pasuk from Megillas Esther that when Mordechai heard about the decree of Haman that every man, woman, and child should be annihilated, it says he put on sackcloth and he sat b'shar hamelech, and he sat at the gateway of the king. She immediately sent a new set of garments, that he should change his garments. Why? Because one doesn't sit at the gateway of the king with sackcloth. It's not appropriate. So over here he cites the pasuk from Megillah. Take a look in the Sifarno if you have the Mikros Gedolos. Kein lova el shara melech b'levush sok. One does not come to the gate of the king wearing sackcloth. So that's what the Torah is revealing. Why was Veichalish Shemosov, as Esther had said to Mordechai, it's inappropriate. Here the Torah says explicitly that protocol is appropriate attire is when you come before the king, v'chalav simosov. So this is just an aside. You know, a person's invited to the White House. I'm not sure today how you go dressed. Maybe with the knees, the jeans are torn at the knees, and something else, whatever. Maybe the sport jacket you're wearing has leather patches at the sleeves with frayed cuffs. I'm not sure. But at one time, if you went to the White House, you went and wore formal attire. Anything less than that was not acceptable. And yet, you go into a certain shul in certain communities, the person's davening Shmon Esrei with these floppy shoes, with shorts, with a t-shirt, with a small kippah on his head. And the Gemara tells us, what is Shmon Esrei? What is the Amida? Kol mid lifnei melech. You're having an audience with God. For God, this is appropriate attire. But when you're invited to the White House or to some official dinner where it says black tie only, even if you have to go buy yourself a tuxedo, you buy it. Because you don't want to seem being different than anyone else, because they won't let you through the door because it's black tie. You understand? When you come before the king, one doesn't come to the gate of the king with Levush Sok. So when you stand before God, you have to wear appropriate attire at some level. Rabbi Yoshev has a question we had in the Mishnah Berurah, that when you say the Birchas Hamazon, you should not say it in shirt sleeves. You should put a jacket on and wear a hat. Cover your head with more than a yarmulke, with more than a kippah. You should wear a hat. And he says it's even more important to wear a hat than a jacket. Your head should be covered with more than the yarmulke. You should wear a hat. But the appropriate attire is a hat and jacket. Chofetz Chaim in Shulchan Aruch. So somebody asked Rabbi Yoshev, in Israel, even people wear jackets, they wear the jacket on their shoulder. So he asked Rabbi Yoshev, it is appropriate if you wear a jacket not to put your hands through the sleeves. Just wear it on your shoulders and a hat. Rabbi Yoshev says definitely. Since that's the way in Israel they wear the jacket, they wear a jacket even when they walk in the street. Sometimes they wear it on their shoulder, where if their hands are not in the sleeves, it's appropriate for benching. So they said to him, what about for Shmon Esrei, for the Amida? Rabbi Yoshev says no. For the Shmon Esrei, you have to put your hands through the sleeves. Why? Because the Gemara quotes a posuk, he called Likros Hashem Elokecho. When you stand before God, you have to be really appropriate. Meaning, is it considered wearing the jacket when you wear it on your shoulders? Yes. So since the Amida is Ka'omed Lifnei Melech, you're having an audience with God, there you have to put your hands through the sleeves. The benching, Birchas Hamazon, it's considered you wearing a jacket. Even your hands are not in the sleeves. So that's Omed Lifnei Melech, you must put your hands through the sleeves. This whole discussion, what about buttoning the button of your jacket? Right? Some people, they put on the jacket, the button doesn't close. But if the button closes, is it more appropriate to close the button when you say the Amida? It's also more appropriate. Because he called Likros Hashem Elokecho. You should prepare yourself before you stand before God. This is one of the reasons why also that if a person has to do his bodily functions before Shmon Esrei, it's appropriate he should relieve himself before, not to feel while he stands in the Amida that he has that urge to relieve himself. It's inappropriate because when you stand before Hashem, you should be in that appropriate state, only focused on the audience with Hashem himself. Here, it's a pasuk in the Torah, when they took Yosef out of the pit, out of the dungeon, to stand before the king, Rashi cites the pasuk in Megillah Esther. You don't come to the Shara Melech with Vushok. You don't come with sackcloth. That means the attire has to be appropriate. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, when he wore his tefillin and he wore his frock, what we call the kapoto, when he put on his tefillin, he would not wear the arm with the tefillin outside the sleeve. He would put his arm through the sleeve with the tefillin. Others don't, but most did not, because he felt wearing the kapoto, you have both, for the same reason, both hands are in the sleeve. You don't leave one sleeve hanging. Everybody, most people, even those who are at that level as Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, because when you wear tefillin, that's the way you wear your jacket or your frock, whatever you're wearing. The question is, when it comes, you take off your tefillin, Rosh Chodesh to say Musaf, do you now, when you remove the tefillin, now do you put the hand that had the tefillin, do you put it through the sleeve, or you still continue wearing it with the sleeve hanging? So it's cited Rebbe Yoshev was the leading posek when Yoshev wore a gartel, when he said the Yamida, when he said the Shmon Esrei, when he davened. When he took his tefillin off, he just continued with his arm out of the sleeve. So they bring that as a source that since it was right after taking off the tefillin to be able to start with the tzibur, because if he would actually rearrange himself, he wouldn't be able to start, or would be tirchut tzibur. The people have to wait for him. Therefore, he held it was considered appropriate, because just as appropriate when you wear the tefillin, even since this is only the after moment after the tefillin, it's not considered inappropriate. But other people, no, when they take off the tefillin, there they make sure to put that hand through the sleeve rather than having that sleeve hang. That's what at least he's referring to.